listener production.
Hi there, welcome to The Briefing. I'm Sasha Barbagat. An inquest into the death of Walpiri man Kumanjayi Walker has just wrapped up in Alice Springs. The 19-year-old was shot and fatally wounded by then police officer Zachary Rolfe in 2019 after he stabbed Rolfe in the shoulder with a pair of scissors. As the inquest examined the circumstances surrounding the shooting, shocking allegations of racism within the Northern Territory Police Force were uncovered, exposing the ugly underbelly of law enforcement in the Territory. Today I'm joined by ABC journalist Melissa Mackay, who has been covering the hearings in Alice Springs. Melissa, thanks for your time today. I suppose the first question I want to understand is, did the inquest always set out to examine racial attitudes of police officers in the Northern Territory?
There was always an element of that in the coroner's inquiry, sort of way back when the inquest was first announced. There was a really long list of issues which counsel assisting had said that they were looking to explore, and some of those issues were on that list. I think there was always going to be an element of looking at the racial attitudes of not only the Northern Territory Police but other government agencies in the Northern Territory as well. I think what has come out since then is probably not exactly what everyone was sort of expecting to see, but I think that there was sort of always going to be that element examined by the coroner.
Let's go back to the incident at the centre of this story, which is the shooting death of Kumanjayi Walker. What came out of the inquest around how police acted at the time in relation to the incident?
So the night of the 9th of November is really contentious. Everyone sort of has a different idea of what happened, what went wrong, what should have happened. It's been really traumatic for a lot of people to talk about, those in Yuendumu, but also the police officers and health staff that were involved. So I guess to sort of give a bit of an overview, essentially what had happened was that 3 days before Kumanjayi Walker was shot, local police in Yuendumu had attempted to arrest him. When they went to his house and tried to take him in, he threatened them with an axe, and those police officers left and sort of ran off from that incident. From there are all sorts of things that sort of, I guess, accumulated over time. We had police officers who said they were overworked and exhausted. We had health staff who say that they had been struggling with break-ins to their houses. They were feeling unsafe in Yuendumu. Eventually, this additional team of police officers were deployed to Yuendumu. So Zachary Rolfe and what was called the immediate response team, sort of a semi-tactical policing unit based in Alice Springs. So they were called in essentially for backup. But exactly what that backup was supposed to be hasn't really been sort of cleared up 100% throughout the inquest and the trial. We heard from local police officers, some who said that they wanted backup in general. They wanted additional boots on the ground because the local officers were overworked and exhausted. And then we heard from members of the IRT who went out to Yuendumu with the understanding that they were there to arrest Kumanjayi Walker after that earlier attempt a couple of days before. Exactly what happened when they arrived in Yuendumu and exactly what they were told, exactly how they were briefed and what the plan from there was. There's been a lot of disagreement over that. Local police officers have said that they wanted Mr. Rolfe and his team to go out and just do some general policing overnight before they were going to arrest Kumanjayi Walker at 5 o'clock the next morning, with a local police officer with them to help them to identify who Kumanjayi Walker was. And then you've got the IRT who have come in and said that they weren't clear on exactly how that was supposed to happen. And so they went out to do what they said was intelligence gathering to figure out where Kumanjayi Walker was, and that they were of the understanding that if they were to come across him, then they were to arrest him. And so eventually they did find him that night, and we know what sort of happened from there.
Zachary Rolfe was charged with murder but later acquitted. At the time, what was the community reaction to that happening?
At the time of the charges and of the committal, when the case was committed to trial in the Supreme Court, family were I guess, pleased is kind of an odd way to put it, but they felt that they were sort of getting towards some sense of justice, I suppose, that there was a police officer charged and going to trial for the murder of an Aboriginal person, which had never happened before. The acquittal came after almost 6 weeks of trial in the Northern Territory Supreme Court. Jurors were deliberating for, I think, about 6 or 7 hours before they came back with that not guilty verdict on all 3 charges. Mr. Rolfe had been facing murder, manslaughter, and engaging in a violent act causing death. And that day in the Supreme Court was really, really emotional for Mr. Rolfe and his family. They left the building first and came and spoke to media, and obviously they were pleased with the outcome. Mr. Rolfe said that obviously he felt that was the right thing to come out of it, but he did, however, acknowledge that Kumanjayi Walker's family were hurting, and it was really emotional when they also then left the court that day, obviously devastated and feeling, I guess, as though that there had been no sense of justice for them.
There have been a number of shocking allegations emerge during these hearings, including about racist awards given out to officers. Tell us what that was about.
Yeah, so these awards came about from Zachary Rolfe, actually, who, when he came to give evidence, he told the coroner that he had been made aware of these awards that had been handed out by the TRG, which is the Tactical Elite Unit within the Northern Territory Police Force. They had been handing out these awards since about 2006, and there's sort of a series of annual awards that were handed out at their end-of-year celebrations. One of them was the Nougata Award, which was a made-up word, we heard, that sounded like an Aboriginal word, and that had the sort of colloquial nickname for that, had a racial slur in the name. And the images of these certificates showed the use of racist language, images of Aboriginal people in an unfavourable light, as well as images of the Aboriginal flag. And we heard that this award in particular was handed out to the officer who had displayed the most outstanding lack of hygiene. And Sergeant Lee Bowens, who was on the TRG and was a recipient of this Nougata Award one year, was asked, what's the connection between a lack of hygiene and Aboriginality? And he told the court, well, that is the link, that some Indigenous people have poor hygiene.
It was quite a shock, wasn't it, when that was revealed? And the Northern Territory Police Commissioner, Michael Murphy, he was the last to give evidence at the inquest, and he admitted that he knew about the awards long before they were ever raised publicly, but he was too busy to act on it. How damning of his leadership is this, and will there be pressure for him to resign?
Well, I guess that's sort of the question to come after all of this. Mr. Murphy did tell the court yesterday that he had been made aware of these awards about 6 months before Mr. Rolfe brought them up in the inquest. Mr. Murphy said that on top of being quite busy at the time, he also, I guess, had to question the veracity of the allegations that had been raised with him in this meeting that he'd had with a former police officer at the time. And he said he did admit that he didn't take them as seriously as he should have, and that he didn't delegate an investigation to someone else as perhaps on reflection he should have. He then, after these awards were made public in the inquest in February of this year, the police commissioner then fronted the media a couple of days after and said that he hadn't heard of these awards before. And so there were a lot of questions put to him in court around why he said that. He said that at the time he simply hadn't made the connection between that meeting that he'd had 6 months earlier and what Mr. Rolfe had brought up in court. But the police commissioner quite clearly and did acknowledge in court that he's got a lot of work to do with his police force. They've got a lot of learning to do and a lot of change to make when it comes to racism and racist attitudes within the police force. He was quite clear to say that his police force as a whole is not racist, but there certainly is a lot of work to do in that space, and particularly in rebuilding relationships with Aboriginal communities.
Yeah, so what are First Nations people then hoping will come out of the inquest once we have the report handed down, however it skews, whatever the result is? What are people in the community wanting to happen?
The community have been saying for a long time that they want to see change, and exactly what that change is, I suppose we'll wait and see when submissions and findings and recommendations are sort of handed down. Speaking with family members yesterday and over the last couple of days, it's been really interesting to hear them say things like that they weren't surprised by some of the evidence that's come out about the attitudes of some police officers when it comes to Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory. They have said that, they've long been raising allegations of racism and that they seem to have not been heard. And so it was really interesting speaking to some of Kumanjayi Walker's family members yesterday who have said that, it's good to see that this is all sort of coming out and has become been made quite public, but that there is sort of that element, I guess, of apprehension around waiting for change to happen. One of the things that they had been saying for a long time is that they wanted to see Mr. Rolfe no longer serving as a police officer. He is no longer on the force. However, that dismissal sort of came separately from his actions directly related to Kumanjayi Walker. There's also been calls from some pockets of the community for there to be no guns in remote communities and for police officers not to carry weapons. So that has also been a big topic for the coroner to look at, and will absolutely be something that she will have to consider.
Well, we'll wait and see what the final findings are of this inquest. Melissa Mackay, thank you so much for joining us today.
No worries.
That was Melissa Mackay, an ABC journalist based out of Alice Springs. And that is all for this episode. A reminder, there is dedicated 24-hour support available for First Nations people who might have been impacted by this story on 13-YARN. That's 139276. I'm Sasha Barbagat. Thank you for listening. I'll be back in your feed with Katrina tomorrow morning at 6.